As development studies scholars and practitioners, many of us get this question a lot, and often we don't have a very straightforward answer. What concepts and buzzwords do we use? Education? Poverty reduction? Human rights? Do we bring up multilateral organizations like development banks or the UN? Or do we talk about various federal agencies and NGOs? But according to many critical actors and thinkers engaging with development, these buzzwords and organizations don't always ask that same crucial question. What exactly is development? Post-developmental thinker Arturo Escobar visited ISS in June 2018 to discuss this question. He shared some of his thoughts on the history of development and development studies, and he presented different narratives for living outside of development paradigms.
When I found this quote, when I was beginning my PhD research on the history of development in the University of California, and I found this the book in the library, it's sort of like something came up, like a proverbial light bulb came up and say, wow, this is amazing, this is what I was looking for. If we read it today, we say, there is a sense in which rapid economic progress is impossible without painful adjustments. Ancient philosophies have to be scrapped, all social institutions have to disintegrate, and bonds of caste, creed, and race have to burst. Large numbers of people who cannot keep up with progress will have to have their expectations of a comfortable life frustrated. Very few people, very few communities are willing to pay the full price of economic progress. Okay, when I saw this, wow, this is it, this is what I'm looking for. This is a way in which I can show that development has operated in these very ethnocentric ways to erase, in a way, completely the hundreds and thousands of years old histories of vast civilizations that overnight supposedly had to be scrapped because there was nothing of value in them. Okay? Today, it sounds very ethnocentric to us. But in 1951, when it was penned by 5 prominent development thinkers, including Nobel Prize for Economics, it made perfect sense. So all of the countries of the Global South, or we would call today the Global South, what was going to be started to be called the Third World, embarked upon this mission of development with great eagerness. And today we have a more eclectic moment in which all kinds of different development varieties coexist, and it's a very interesting moment because of that, but with 2 great tendencies maybe. The first one is pluralizing development, so we have to make development most plural, both in our intellectual analysis and in our social practice, and also thinking about alternatives to development. This is sort of the classic post-development, if you wish, classic critical development. Let me put them all there, sorry. What was the post-socialist critique? Start by saying that development in a way was a very, sort of in a way radically, it was a cultural political project, a civilizational project, if you wish, by the rich countries in relation to the poor countries of the world, that these countries, Asia, Africa, Latin America, were discovered and invented as underdeveloped, and then treated as such through these development projects and strategies. Systematically after that, it became hegemonic. Everywhere you looked at, there was people doing development, thinking development. It was impossible to think otherwise, apparently. We know that now, that it wasn't exactly the case. And it operated through professionalizing knowledges about development in all fields, and most of us have worked in one of those fields, and also through institutionalizing development practice. Then the project that started after sort of deconstructing development in that way, with the tools of discourse analysis, was then what? How do we move from here? Can we move beyond development? Can we do and think other than development? And we are still coping with that question. That would pose for the first time 25 years ago, but we are re-articulating the question in more interesting ways. There are the sources for that come from social theory, from people working with Ivan Illich, for instance, from intellectuals from the Global South, many from South Asia, Latin America, from Africa. And the basic idea, one of the ideas was that, well, we have to stop describing and representing Asia, Africa, and Latin America as underdeveloped or as in need of development. And even taking that step sort of made a difference. So we can start thinking again about how to name, how to describe, how to represent otherwise. And came out this very useful distinction between development alternatives, which is basically within type 2 debates, so we can add qualifiers to development, gender and development, participatory development, sustainable development, rural development with equity, etc., and alternatives to development. The basic point is you need post-development questions the centrality of development in the description of social life. It's about displacing the centrality of development so that you can look at social life and real life, again, with different lenses than those of development. And that meant questioning those core values of progress, material consumption, growth, the reliance on expert knowledge, and at the end of the day, questioning anthropocentrism, secularism, modernity, and now we would add coloniality. Many of the central insights of post-development has been incorporated into mainstream development studies. For instance, most people today agree that development in its early phases was an imposition by the West. That is important to pay attention to local knowledges. But he also said that the post-development theorists buried development too early. Development is still alive and well, and he gives a lot of examples about that. And then he makes an appeal, which to me makes a lot of sense, about re-articulating a critique for new context, for the context of today. Sometimes I mention this, but Arturo Escobar says, we're facing modern problems for which there aren't modern solutions. Suggesting the crisis in which we are is in many ways, not only, but in many ways, the product of a dominant modern ways of being, but that modernity itself is not producing sufficient elements to redress it. Looking globally, and this is the thing that I've been doing over the past 10 years or so, what I found, what I started to collect in a ways, because that's what we academics do in some ways, is collect narratives. I started collecting narratives of transition, or discourses of transition, and finding that there's a lot of people saying we need to accomplish very significant transitions in the way we're doing things today. It goes beyond climate change, but climate change has been a trigger for that, a very important trigger for that. And you find Buddhist teachers talking about that, like Thich Nhat Hanh, for instance, has really amazing things on that. You have some scientists, alternative scientists speaking about that, many social movements speaking about that, degrowth theorists and people writing about the commons and commoning in the US and Europe talking about that. And so we have all of these visions in the global north and in the global south, people talking about post-development and transitions to post-extractivism. And there is not a single, and there shouldn't be, a single recipe for how to accomplish the transitions, not even a single reading or interpretation, or where from and towards which.
So as a student, as a development studies student, it is important to us to know that other ways of creating are possible, and that as the same way as modernity and the dominant notion of development was created till now, we now have the possibility to create these other realities and to be actively involved in the creation of these other realities. And also, I think Escobar's work has been very, very useful and very insightful in order to be also sensitive, to these other realities, because you are always taught that things are in a certain way, and you kind of feel you lose these senses to understand other ways of thinking, of creating knowledge.
So my question is exactly, how does urban studies connect directly to the Buen Vivir, for example? Because what I see is that there's still a disconnection between the cities and all the concepts that we study, the right to the city, with all these post-development theories. Because if we take just example of Yasuní in Ecuador, or the extractivism, where we still stop respecting this as an excuse of development of the cities, and we put all our efforts on the cities, I feel that there's still a disconnection. So what would be the way that these concepts are not exclusive anymore?
Does Buen Vivir have any relevance to the city? And the immediate answer is, of course, yes. But it is true that most discussion about Buen Vivir talks about the rural, and about the forests, and about ethnic peoples, and about peasants, not about people in the cities. And it is also true that people in the cities are the ones maybe who are in most need of Buen Vivir, because Buen Vivir is more difficult to find in the cities. So I think that in what I've been trying to do now lately is in a way, and this is building on the work of a Colombian architect and designer, is how to, in a way, ruralize the city. Can the city be ruralized? I mean, sort of invert the picture. And the traditional picture is that everything that is good comes out from the city. Civility, democracy, art, technology. Nothing of value comes out from the countryside, other than food. The rest is, backward peasants. But how about if peasants and the relationality of life that is found in the countryside could serve also today as a clue for rethinking the city? And part of that rethinking will have to be bringing in Buen Vivir. So Tony Fry, who is an Australian design thinker, who writes about ontological design as well, is now writing about metrofitting. Notice the rethinking of cities from relational perspectives and from the perspective of Buen Vivir. That's one part of it. The other part of it is how do we promote, how do we foster new ways of being communal in cities? And with the, we just went in Barcelona at the Congress, and in the neighborhood where we stayed, there are, in Scandinavia, I think there's quite a bit of this as well, the apps that neighbors use to connect with each other for particular needs. Is because I need a pinch of salt, or because my TV doesn't work, and if anybody knows how to fix it, whatever. So there's a lot of this reconnecting.
You talked about rejecting the economic centrality, Western centrality, and the third thing, if I remember correctly, was expert knowledge. And it was the third rejection that struck me slightly, because of course a lot of politicians also use the same argument, right, to push their own political agendas, right? So reject expert knowledge, climate change is a hoax, and so on, right? So I was wondering, how does this work in practice, right? Rejecting expert knowledge. And we have all these students, we show them books, you also show them book covers, journal articles. How do we get credible information?
It sounds like a rejection of expert knowledge is more a lessening of the dominance of expert knowledge in all of these kinds of debates. Development has been about expert knowledge. Classical development assumed that the expert knew, the person to be developed or the group to be developed didn't have any knowledge. That has been reversed somewhat with the emphasis on local knowledge. But I like the concept of an Italian designer, Ezio Mancini, who wrote a book a couple of years ago, which is called Design When Everybody Designs. So he says, today everybody designs their own life. Communities practice the design of itself. And they use expert knowledge, but they also use other knowledges, their own diffuse knowledge, he calls it diffuse design, non-expert knowledges, intuitive knowledges, collective knowledges, collaborative, co-design knowledges, and so forth. But it's true. There is a risk in rejecting expert knowledge to become allies of those who deny social climate change and so forth. So it's a question about lessening the hegemony of a particular way of knowing.
One thing that Escobar talked about was this issue of challenging expertise in a way, or rethinking what is knowledge, or acknowledging different kinds of knowledge. And that was one thing where I thought that's what we can do with children and young people, is start to really understand and acknowledge their expertise, especially on their own experience. So this is what we've been trying to do in some of the work that I've been doing in the projects I've been doing here at ISS, where we have, we're working with children and young people as researchers and as participants in our research programs that are about their experience. So, but I often find it really interesting that people have trouble actually to take children as holders or as experts or as holders of knowledge and as co-producers of knowledge. So that's one thing that we find is always a constant struggle, and it's part of our process now, is to really keep trying to make sure that we don't encroach on that, and that we do really listen to what young people have to say and how they understand their experience, because there's so many ways in which there's many instances in which it's very easy to sort of step in and go, no, it's about what we think it's about. And actually it's really difficult to do for a lot of adults, because they don't even realize they're doing it, right? They think they believe a lot in really having young people involved in these projects, and yet we have to go, oh look, we're doing it again. We're actually encroaching on really that space that we've tried very hard to maintain for young people to really give input into the projects. So so it's a challenge, but I think it's a good one, and I think it's a productive one to think with and to keep trying to do.
Most important things about this discussion is that it's about understanding different interpretations. It's not about finding a secret truth. It's more about like how different ways of seeing the world can coexist, and how the importance is in the process of this. The importance is about these interpretations, the process where these visions of the world are built, and not about the result itself. I think that's important.
Well, I'm quite a new entrant in the development sector per se, and most of my journey began with his writings, and the concept of post-development particularly got my interest, and I was particularly wanting to learn more and more about how post-development, which seems like a utopian world, works in the real life. And especially in today's lecture, when he kind of answered how we could situate Buen Vivir in the urban cities of today, and with so many people and so many pluralities that exist at the same time, it is very difficult to understand how we can actually realize these realities in real life.
I already know that there are many worlds and many ways of knowing things and many ways of approaching work, but it just seems that the universal way of it, the sort of dominant hegemonic way of it, seems to be very entrenched. In terms of pathways or ways to move forward, we have a steep hill to climb, but I think that a lot of us are already working towards this goal of creating the world that we all envision, and that's one where everybody is equal and everybody feels that they have space and they have a place.